Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Geezerology Roundtable. I'm Scott, coming to you from Broward County, Florida, and I'm talking today with Bob and Dan, who are up in the middle of the country, up in the great state of Missouri. Today, we're going to get back to Jimi Hendrix Experience, and we're going to revisit Axis Bold as Love, which was the band's second LP. This album was released in the UK in December of 1967, and then Reprise Records released it in the US a month later in January 1968. This album featured no hit singles. The only single from the album was Up From the Skies, but that thing got grounded. It never went anywhere, and it didn't have any legs at all. Axis Bold as Love did reach number 3 on the Billboard 200 album chart, so it sold well, just no hit singles from it. Personally, just before I turn it over to our friends, I do like this album more than the debut, with Are You Experience, which we talked about a few weeks ago. This one to me just seems like more of a focused effort. And it just feels like Hendrix in particular is showing a little more confidence than he did in the first album. And this just feels to me like more of a cohesive album than Are You Experienced, which was really more of a collection of songs, in my opinion. But I'll get more into my reaction to this record later. But for now, I'll turn the microphone over to Bob to get us started. Bobby, take it away, buddy.
All right, thank you, Scotty. I'm going to right out of the gate, disagree with you a little bit. This is not a bad album per se, but I don't think it necessarily lives up to the debut album in all areas. And I think it's a little unfocused and it feels kind of incomplete to me. What I do like about it, though, is that Hendrix did get into some different genres. He did some jazz pop stuff. He did a little bit more pop type music, along with, his psychedelia, histronics and stuff. I think the album suffers a little bit from some production issues. Reportedly, Hendrix lost the master tapes to the entire first side of the album because he left them in a taxi. So they had to do a marathon session of remixing everything to meet a deadline. And on If 6 Was 9, they actually used the tape that I think Noel Redding had, and it was a wrinkled tape, and they actually had to iron it to kind of smooth it out. So I think there's some production issues there. And some of the songs on this kind of feel incomplete to me. So I'm going to try to do a real quick song by song breakdown here. The album right out the gate is marred for me by the song EXP. I guess you could call it a song.
I think it's not a song.
It's not a song. It's just a gimmicky nonsense, in my opinion. Hendrix is being interviewed on a fake radio show about UFOs and extraterrestrials, and then it kind of dissolves into what I consider just noise and distortion. And I've always felt it was just a horrible way to begin that album, and back in the old days when they had to do tone arm things, I always tried to drop past the first track. As Scott mentioned, Up From the Skies, the second track, was the only single from the album, and it bombed, which I think was undeserved because it's not a bad song. It's a good little jazzy pop thing, and I think it deserved better than what it got. Spanish Castle Magic, track number 3. I love this song. It's a tune about a venue near Seattle that Hendrix played at early in his career that was called Spanish Castle. And it's a pure garage psychedelia. It's rough and ballsy. I really like the tune. Wait Until Tomorrow had the potential to be a good track, but I think it's really marred by these little girl backing vocals from Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, and they sing this little falsetto backing vocals, and I think it just ruins the whole song for me. Ain't No Tellin' starts out with Promise, but it's a short track and only runs 1 minute and 46 seconds. And it just kind of feels like it was an unfinished composition. And it was also marred by, I think, weak backing vocals from Hendrix's band members. Although thankfully this time they didn't sing in a falsetto, but still they just didn't have it as far as vocals. Little Wing is the first of what I think are the three best tracks on the album. That's a shorter song, but it doesn't feel incomplete. I think it's concise. It gets its message across. It's a rhythm and blues ballad where Hendrix seems to try to describe the feminine ideal. And it became a concert staple for Hendrix, you know, and it's one of his better known songs. Second great track, If Six Was Nine. This is a memorable song. It was immortalized in its appearance on Peter Fonda's Easy Rider movie. And it also gave us that wonderful line, I'm gonna wave my freak flag high, you know, and that became a catchphrase for the whole hippie generation, even though in the song, Hendrix actually takes shot at hippies along with taking a shot at the white collar conservatives. It's actually a two-part song. There's like a suite A and a suite B. I think the song is marred a little bit, you know, by the second half where Hendrix goes into this spoken monologue. And then you get the foot stomping on the drum platform by people who are hanging out in the studio, you know, including Graham Nash. So it's a great song that could have been better if they would have worked a little bit on the second half, but still a great tune. You Got Me Floatin', features backing vocals from Trevor Burton and Roy Wood from The Moves. And they're obviously much better singers, you know, than Hendrix's bandmates. And got some great lines in this song. Now your daddy's cool and your mama's no fool. They both know I'm head over heels for you. And this is where I love. And when the day melts down into a sleepy red glow, that's when my desire starts to show. Hendrix had some chops as a songwriter, you know, and he's got some great lyrics. Castles Made of Sand, another great song, a dreamy meditation about the disappointments in life. It's got the great metaphoric line, and so castles made of sand melt into the sea eventually. This is supposedly an autobiographical song about Hendrix's, you know, troubled childhood, but even though it's kind of a negative song, he redeems it at the end, where he brings it down to a girl sitting on the beach in a wheelchair contemplating suicide, but you know, things turn around for her. And I think that's the third of, you know, the great tracks on the album. She's So Fine is a song written and sung by Noel Redding. It doesn't fit the rest of the album. It feels like a throwaway. I feel like it was included here. Either Hendrix was throwing a bone to his bandmate, or he didn't have enough material, you know, so they added it. It just doesn't fit the rest of the album, in my opinion. One Rainy Wish is a reflective love song that's presented as a straightforward pop rock piece of music. Doesn't have Hendrix's tendency to go into psychedelic histrionics. It's a good tune. I like it. Little Miss Lover got some really funky guitar work and what I consider otherwise kind of a throwaway filler. Not a bad song, but not something that really makes me want to come back and return to it. The title song, Bold as Love, ends this album, and there's some really, really nice guitar work on this tune, but the lyrics leave me really confused, and I think that this is the time when Hendrix didn't quite cut it as a songwriter. He tries to use colors as, I guess, a metaphor for various human passions. For example, the opening lines, anger, he smiles, towering in shiny metallic purple armor. Queen jealousy, envy waits behind him. You know, I just don't have the energy to try to decipher what he's trying to say here. I know many people consider this to be a tremendous song. I guess I'm going to be kind of an outlier on this one. It just doesn't work for me. So in summation, there is some great material on the album, but I think some of the songs don't feel complete. I like the fact that Hendrix was expanding, that, he did show his pop ability, his pop jazz fusion abilities and things like that. But I think the album's a little uneven. So that's my opinion on it. Again, like I say, great tunes, but some filler material. So.
Interesting. I'll respond to a couple things. I'll let Dee have the floor. But yeah, there's a couple of
I figured you would
get some counterpoints on that one. But thanks for that, Bobby. Dee, where are you?
Yeah, Bob,
where are you at on this one?
Well, first I want to say thank Bob for going through the track by track. We don't often do that. I rarely do it because I run out of breath. But that's another thing. Yeah, I agree. I think it was not a smart move to put EXP as the first track on this album. I don't know what they were thinking, but this second LP by The Experience, it's vintage psychedelic rock era stuff. People are experimenting, and especially in the studio, and I think on several of these tracks where he's using some guitar techniques with flanger and maybe reverse tape. I think he was definitely, either inspired or somewhat influenced by what the Beatles were doing on Sgt. Pepper's, and even prior to that. I really, really like 4 songs on this album. I think Little Wing is gorgeous for its arrangement, the lyrics. Castles Made of Sand, definitely, and the common thread between a lot of the songs on here is I think Hendrix was doing sort of a, stream of consciousness, maybe trippy approach, and it worked for for these songs like Little Wing, Castles Made of Sand. Probably the one song that I've listened to more than any on this record was If 6 Was 9, and that was due to I had the soundtrack to Easy Rider, and at the time, I just thought it was a great little bit of sort of a jazz rock with some kind of not throwaway, but some political comments in there, and then it fades out. And I'd like to say some of the effects on that with at the very end, I guess the last 30 seconds with this really high pitched screaming, which he accomplished with the guitar. I thought, what is that? It almost could be like a flock of birds fornicating or something. I mean, that's kind of where it took me, but I think his songwriting and lyrics were a notch up from the first record. And I think that's probably the one part of his contribution that maybe gets overlooked is his songwriting abilities. Yes, he could be a song stylist, as we discovered on his first record. He took some classic R&B and did his take on it. And I feel that this record, while not perfect, I listened to it a lot when I had it on tape, cassette tape, way back when. And I think that, today, would this hold up if you had a young listener or maybe up and coming band? Yeah, they're going to listen to it because it's Jimi Hendrix. But I think it lives and thrives in that particular time frame of pure psychedelic. Take me to the third stone from the sun feel. And the other tunes that come across to me is I could do without Noel Redding's vocal. I mean, yeah, as I think Bob mentioned, it might have been a throwaway, or he just ran out of song material to use. I could do without that. Castles Made of Sand, great tune. The Little Miss Lover, another hard R&B infused with Hendrix's unmistakable style. I'm going to say this is a strong follow-up album to the first record. And to me, the unifying theme here is psychedelia, kind of stream of consciousness type lyrics. Some of it's good, some of it's not. I mean, Little Wing, you know, she's walking through the clouds with a circus mind running wild. You know, that I think that was, you know, that could be placed that alongside Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds,
Right.
to name a few. So I will step out on that particular viewpoint. So yeah, Axis Boldest Love, I think it was a respectable follow-up and a good link to the third LP. And that's me on Axis.
Yeah, this is not a perfect album. I don't think a perfect Jimi Hendrix or Jimi Hendrix Experience album exists anywhere. You know, either when recorded when he either released when he was with us, or any of the posthumous albums. They're all pretty much grab bags, except this one. I don't think this is a grab bag. I think there are a couple of problems with it. I agree that the Noel Redding song "She's So Fine" is just you know, my take on it is that it was put on there just to throw Noel Redding a bone, right? And reading the history of this album, that was actually the first song they recorded for this album, was the Noel Redding song. And but overall, I just think this is probably the closest that we would ever get to a product that came straight out of Jimi Hendrix, you know, without the influence of Chaz Chandler wanting to get a couple of hit singles out there, wanting to release a marketable album or whatever like that. I think this is as close as we ever got to something that was straight from Jimi Hendrix's heart. You know, I agree. A couple of these songs might be song fragments, and they may not have been finished. If he would have had some time, you know, they might have been different or something like that. But I just think that there's really a cohesion here with a couple of speed bumps. There's really a cohesion here with these songs that weren't there on any other Jimi Hendrix album. And I think D might be onto something there when he says that the unifying theme here is just you know, Hendrix's sort of stream of consciousness, psychedelic sort of things. We know, we got into this when we talked about Are You Experience, that, you know, we discovered that Hendrix was a big science fiction fan. And I think that explains some of the choices that were made here. I mean, EXP, and I always thought, I always wondered, what is this? I mean, this is just crappy. But now that I know that Jimi Hendrix is this big science fiction fan, well, now it makes perfect sense where this came from. And if you pay attention, I think that EXP is almost sort of an intro and a lead in to the song Up From the Skies, which follows it. Because I hear now Up From the Skies in that context, I hear Up From the Skies as Jimi Hendrix writing a song about having a conversation with some alien that came from space, and, you know, they're making our first contact, right? Close Encounters of the Third Kind sort of thing. And so to me, EXP is a perfect lead-in for that, Up From the Skies. And I think you get a little bit more of that through here, but this, I think maybe where a lot of folks miss the mark on this album, and I think probably Bob too, where Bob is missing this. This is not a Jimi Hendrix guitar album. You know, we remember Jimi Hendrix as the guy with the flashy guitar and doing all this crazy, you know, over the top antics with his guitar. Well, that's not what this is. These songs are Jimi Hendrix showing off his new developing licks as a songwriter. You know, I think these are all done as Jimi Hendrix songs and not as Jimi Hendrix showpieces. You know, and and so that's part of why I think that this is probably a little more focused and a little more cohesive album here, because he's showcasing the songs and not really showcasing his eccentricities as a guitar player. I do also know from reading the history of the production of this album, yeah, there was a thing where he lost the tapes and they had to do a little bit of a rush job to patch some of these things up and get them finished by the deadline to get this album released. But you know, I don't think that really that really shows much in the final product. I think it still turned out pretty well. You know, maybe if they had the original, it may have been a little bit better. But you know, I never really got a sense that it was a production disaster from listening to this album. But I do know from researching this album that this is kind of the seeds. The recording of this album was kind of the seeds of a developing power struggle between Hendrix and Chas Chandler, because Hendrix started getting a little more comfortable in a recording studio, and he started he started bossing Chandler around a little bit, started taking the reins, and they were having their disagreements and how things should be recorded and things like that. And that eventually blew up when the Electric Ladyland session started a little while later, and Chandler just threw in the towel and walked away because he and Hendrix weren't seeing eye to eye in a recording studio. Well, apparently, from what I'm reading, all that kind of started here. That also was the beginning of Hendrix's split with Noel Redding, because Redding was kind of like Chandler. Redding hated, because apparently Hendrix was a perfectionist and wanted to do takes over and over and over and over and over again, and that was. And Mitch Mitchell was on Hendrix's side on that stuff, where Chandler and Noel Redding just hated that. They just wanted to go in and get it done and get the hell out of there. But anyway, that I don't know. I think that probably shows up in the music here a little bit, and that's kind of why I think this is a little more of Hendrix showing off his chops as a songwriter instead of as the more flashy a guitar player, and probably that's a result of Hendrix trying to take a little bit more control of the situation, and it sounds like he did here. I think is it a great album? I don't think it's a great album. Like I say, I don't think a great Jimi Hendrix album exists anywhere, and it's not an album that you know, most people do remember. Of the three Jimi Hendrix Experience albums, most of the notice goes to Electric Ladyland and Are You Experienced, the debut. I don't, you know, and I understand why that is, because this is not flashy Jimi Hendrix. This is more artistic Jimi Hendrix, in my view, and but it's not a perfect album. I think it would have been a step for Hendrix if he would have been around longer and carried on longer and gone there. I think we might have heard more things like this. I think we hear hints of this approach of Hendrix's approach to music. We hear hints of that of some of the posthumous studio albums that came out, Cry of Love, Rainbow Bridge, and all that. I think we hear some development of this direction that Hendrix is going in some of those later albums. Not in Electric Ladyland. Electric Ladyland was something completely different, which we'll get into later. But I think that's why this album tends to be overlooked and when people discuss Hendrix and remember Hendrix, because it was something. It was a step that he took that never was developed fully, and we went more in the direction of Hendrix as a showman and as a flashy guitar player. and we didn't see much more of this side of Jimi Hendrix. And I like it. When I listen to it, when I go review it, I like this album. Again, not a perfect one, but a good one. And just to say, Spanish Castle Magic is the song that I always think about whenever I hear somebody mention Access Bold as Love, or whenever I think of listening to this album. Spanish Castle Magic is always the tune that pops into my brain when I think of this album. And yeah, If 6 Was 9 was the one that's probably the most remembered, but just because of the Easy Rider soundtrack. Good album, not great album. Yep, that's my take on it. Any rebuttals out there?
Yeah, I want to do my counterpoint to your counterpoint. This is my take, and I could be way out in left field on this, but I think at heart, Hendrix was a jazz and rhythm and blues person. I mean, that's what he cut his chops on out up there on that Chitlin circuit, you know, playing guitar for the Isley Brothers and Little Richard and things like that. And I always thought Are You Experienced, the debut album, was his great experimentation into the weird guitar stuff. And it was so different that it's been immortalized. This, I kind of felt, was in some ways Hendrix kind of going back to his roots, because you got more pop and jazz blues and jazz pop on this album. And I like that Hendrix, okay? I don't dislike it. I think he was great at it. My problem with the album is it doesn't feel like it was fully realized in some of the areas. And and some of the stuff that I've read, yeah, there were clashes between him and Chandler. And I think Hendrix was a perfectionist, and they were trying to say, like, we got to get this thing in the can. You got a contract. You got to do a second album, blah, blah, blah. And Hendrix was out here going, oh, look, a recorder. I want to play with this. Oh, a Mellotron. I want to play with this, you know? And so I think there's a little bit of a lack of focus, and it needed one of two things, either a little bit firmer hand or give him more time to complete what he was trying to do here. And I think he was on the right track. And I do really like Hendrix as a pop guy and as a jazz pop guy and a rhythm and blues guy. I almost like him sometimes better that way than when he was out there doing the psychedelic guitar stuff. So it had great potential. I just think that in some of the tracks, he didn't get there.
Well, let me throw this at you. You say it wasn't fully realized. You know, I mean, especially back in these days. I mean, people were cranking out product back in these days. You know, they were cranking that, not like today, where people work on an album for 5 or 6 years before it out. Back in those days, people would work on an album for 5 or 6 weeks from conception to release, right? Because they were just cranking them out 2 or 3 a year sometimes. I agree. A lot of these things weren't fully realized. There were a lot of Beatles albums that weren't fully realized. The White Album was an album that was. I mean, you know, you could almost say this is akin to the Beatles' White Album, where the White Album was basically just a bunch of song fragments that they came together with and threw out a classic double album. So by saying it's not fully realized, I agree with that, but I don't agree that it's a fault of the albums. And let me toss this hypothetical out. Had Hendrix not, you know, all of a sudden disappeared from us, you know, just a couple of years after this album was released, you know, still very early, and you know, his career was still building momentum when he left us. This isn't fully realized, but okay, so he stayed alive, and he was working on a new studio album. Say he would have been around and recorded a few more studio albums over the course of the next 10 years, say 4 or 5 more, and some of them along this vein, and not the not the big flashy blues eccentric guitarist that we came to know him from, that he kind of went in this phase, did a little more jazzy, poppy sort of things as he carried on. And there would have been 3 or 4 or more albums following in the footsteps of this one. And then if that would have happened, would we have looked back on this one as saying, okay, this was the beginning of that direction that Hendrix went into. And this is and this was pretty good. There were some flaws. He hadn't figured this out yet, but eventually, you know, 2 or 3 albums down the road, okay, well, this is kind of what he started back now. Well, now he's got it figured out, and now he's perfected this technique or this idea or whatever. Would you know, given that, just try to put that in your head. Say this would have been the first of a succession of 4 or 5 albums that moved in this direction. Would your opinion of this be different as would your opinion of this being an unsuccessful album be different? Would you think of this as a successful starting point?
I don't think my opinion of the album really would have changed, because I'm not saying this was an unsuccessful album. This is an album that has points of brilliance, but is also flawed by some material that is weak and or not fully conceptualized or completed. So I think that would be, I would feel the same about the album, regardless of whether Hendrix.
Well, what context are you making that criticism in? Because there were, I mean, there were a lot of albums that came out in that period that are considered classic that were unreal, you know, that had some major flaws and were not entirely successful.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could say that probably about the vast majority of stuff that was ever produced. Okay, so what I'm saying is EXP, as far as I'm concerned, you could throw that away and I wouldn't miss it at all. Wait Until Tomorrow, a good tune that I feel was marred by the stupid falsetto backing vocals. The one song that I thought was so short that it just didn't feel like it was a completed song. So those issues would exist regardless of how much longer Hendrix would have been with us. So there, you know, half or more of the album is brilliant, and the other tracks showed promise, but just feel to me like they weren't fully complete, or it was, you know, and the inclusion of Noel Redding's song just strikes me as total absolute filler. So at least half of the album or more, I think, is brilliant. Okay, so that to me stands regardless of what Hendrix would or would not have done in the future. So I think from something that I've read, and I don't know if it's true or not, is that there was a deadline and a contract that said you got to do 2 albums in '67. So some of the album feels a little rushed and incomplete to me. That's my problem with it. I like the direction it was going. I like the jazz pop stuff. I like the rhythm and blues. And a lot of the songs on here I really like. And so I just think that it wasn't totally complete. Are You Experienced? I think there's one song on there that I felt didn't have much merit, but everything else on that album I really, really liked. So it's just, and I think the feeling that the album isn't totally complete would stand regardless of what Hendrix did. Now, if Hendrix would have continued and really went strong into more pop or jazz pop or rhythm and blues type stuff, the big hypothetical question for me is, would he have kept the stature that he developed based on the debut album? If he would have moved away from that intense psychedelic, you know, guitar driven experimental stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't know that, but you know, but all we could do is just hypothesize. I mean, would he eventually have become a because there's definitely two different sides of Jimi Hendrix, as this album shows us. There was, and most of what we got posthumously was all of his live stuff, and the things that he did live, and what he did live was really pretty different than what he did in the studio. There was a studio Jimi Hendrix, there was a songwriting studio recording Jimi Hendrix, and there was a guitar guy Jimi Hendrix on the stage. And I don't, and with three, with only three proper albums that that were released as the way that he intended them to be released when he was still with us. There's not a whole lot. There's not a big sample size there, so we don't really know where this would have gone, if he would have stuck around, right? Final thoughts, D?
I've always liked this album. There's a couple songs I can, do without, but Little Wing, Castles Made of Sand, If 6 Was 9, that's enough to carry it over, for me.
Okay, well, that was an interesting discussion. Some interesting hypotheticals there. I'd like to know what you think. I mean, we know exactly what is out there now from Jimi Hendrix, it'd be. We had this discussion a little bit about the Doors. What would the Doors be like had Jim Morrison not died? And we all have our opinions on that, but the same thing here. You just don't really know. Would our opinion of Jimi, I'm sure it would be, would our opinion and our memories of Jimi Hendrix be so much different had he not died, had he stuck around until 47 or 57 or 67 instead of 27? It's interesting to think about what Jimmy would have wanted his career to be, moving forward. Because, like I say, because there is a dichotomy there, and the one side of it, I think, doesn't get remembered very well. But anyway, tell us what you think down in the comment sections. But thanks for joining us for this. We'll be back in a few weeks. We'll continue our discussion of the Jimi Hendrix Experience discography with Electric Ladyland, which will be coming up in a few weeks, and we'll get to that. Coming up, we have some reviews on Friday that you'd be interested in. We have a few more roundtables discussions coming up in the following Tuesdays. We have one coming up with Joe Cocker. We're going to get back to Creedence Clearwater, and we have a couple of more things in the can, or ready to go, not in the can, but ready to go. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Join us again on Friday. We'll see you later. So long.
So long.